Welcome to the OMG Tarot podcast. I'm your host, Lindsay, aka OMG Tarot. I am feeling a lot better now and I'm ready to get back to podcasting. So let's dive right in. Today, we're talking about number 20 in the Major Arcana, Judgment. I didn't originally plan for this to be the last episode of season 1, but once it worked out that way, I think it's very fitting, because Judgment is the penultimate card in the Major Arcana. It's a reflection on all the lessons you've learned and all the progress you've made, and the sense of renewal that comes through doing that reflection. By the time you reach Judgment, you're at the end of the line. At this point, there are no more lessons to learn. In fact, this card is a reflection on all the lessons that you ideally learned as you moved through the Major Arcana. It's a checkpoint before you reach the world, because remember, the world is all about completion. The world is the seamless end of one cycle and movement into the next cycle. However, the world's themes aren't guaranteed, so you can think of Judgment as the point where you determine if you have the right credentials to move on to the world. Let's take a look at this card, symbol by symbol. If you're working with a Rider-Waite-Smith deck, or a similar deck, you can see that in the top half of the card, there's an angel with blonde hair who's playing a trumpet, and on that trumpet, there's a flag that's white with a red cross. Down below, there are 6 people who are all looking up at the angel, and they seem to be excited. Let's take a closer look at these people. They're all naked, and they're all gray. They appear to be waking up out of these boxes. Are these boxes coffins? Is the angel waking the dead? They might just be. This card can often symbolize a spiritual awakening. You can read it as the enlightenment that comes from completing the steps in the Fool's Journey. These people did the work. They went step by step, piece by piece. They were in the tower, they met the devil, they did the star, the emperor, the empress, all of those things, and now they're ready to ascend. And take a look at what they're ascending toward. They're ascending from this very washed out, very grayscale physical world up to a full color spiritual one. Notice the contrast between the angel, which is all different colors and very vibrant, and the people who are all the same exact shade of gray, and they all have the same blonde hair. Let's take a look at what else is on this card. We see lots and lots of water. Spiritual enlightenment is a pretty emotional process, don't you think? These people certainly think so, and they feel it too. They're down there in the depths, surrounded by water, but they're looking upward toward the angel who's up in the air and surrounded by clouds. You could interpret this as moving from feeling to understanding. Now that the people are a bit more removed from their spiritual journey, they're able to look at it objectively. They're able to drop it into context and understand the what and the why behind all the things that they observed and experienced. So think of Judgment like that. It's like a review. And I think it's very appropriate for this time of year when we're all over social media doing our Spotify Wrapped and our year in review videos. We're taking a look back at where we've been and what we've achieved, and now that we have that benefit of some distance from it, we can really see how did things build on each other? How did certain seeds that we planted months and months ago bloom into something that maybe paid off? Maybe it paid off differently than we'd expected, but nonetheless became part of our lives and affected us months and maybe even years down the line. Let's talk a bit more about the angel, because like a lot of the angels in your tarot deck, many people associate it with a specific figure from Judeo-Christian tradition. This angel is often said to be Gabriel, the angel associated with power and acts of justice. With this in mind, we can see how this image depicts the idea of the people being called to step into their spiritual power and take greater control of it. This is underscored by the flag that's on the angel's trumpet. That's not the flag of England, although I know it kind of looks like it. This is actually the flag of St. George, which is associated with the figure St. George, obviously, who was a crusader. I'm not going to go too deep into the history and lore of St. George here, but just know that he's a figure who was known as a warrior saint during the Third Crusade, and that this flag, although it became associated with him later, was actually initially associated with the Knights Templar, a group that fought during the Second Crusade. More importantly for our purposes, we can read this as a reference to ideas like justice and absolution. And yes, I know there is another card called Justice. It was the first episode of this podcast, but I think it's worth looking at the differences between justice and judgment here. My personal interpretation of the two is really not that different from the way I interpret death versus the tower. I read justice as being a lot more internal and a lot more about you as the querent using all the information at your disposal to make a righteous, balanced, fair call. Versus judgment is a little bit more about being judged. You're the one having that call made about you. So it's a bit more external. Kind of like how death is about you deciding what you need to get rid of in order to make room for something new, versus the tower is more, regardless of whether you wanted it or not, this is happening to you. And what's happening to you? Judgment over whether or not you properly heeded the call and did what you were supposed to do. This is the end of the line. This is, I submitted all my documents, did they get approved or didn't they? And in this way, you can read release themes into Judgment a lot like how you can read them into the tower. And we can see this idea in the imagery that Pamela Coleman Smith chose to depict in this card. It's a reference to the Last Judgment, which is the part of the Bible it's discussed in all the 4 canonical Gospels about Jesus Christ's second coming and how when he comes, he judges every single human being on earth. Some of them get saved and some of them don't. And in some decks, this card is renamed the Last Judgment. In fact, one of my favorite decks does this. It's called the Carnival at the End of the World Tarot, and if you've never seen it, Google it. It's such a beautiful deck. I love it so much. Our last bit of imagery in this card is the mountain range along the horizon and the small trees down at the base. In tarot, mountains symbolize obstacles to overcome, and take a look at the scale of these mountains. They're huge, they're gigantic, there's quite a lot to have overcome to be at this point. And that's not all. They're also covered with snow. Think about where else you've seen a snow-peaked mountain in the major arcana. The Hermit is standing on top of one. And the Hermit has come pretty far. Not unlike these people, the Hermit has seen some stuff and overcome some stuff. Think back to where the Hermit fits into the major arcana. He comes right after Strength and right before the Wheel of Fortune. In a lot of ways, he's right at the end of the first wave of the Fool's Journey. This is the point in the Fool's Journey where, when I'm teaching about it in class, I typically ask my students, has anything crazy happened to the Fool yet? And they always answer no, and that's the right answer. Up until this point, sure, the Fool has had some experiences and learned some lessons, but they've all been very rooted in the day-to-day. He's met the Empress and the Emperor and the Hierophant, and he drove off in the chariot. These are all very straightforward, practical things. And he hasn't yet really been the driver of the action. We see a little bit of him starting to take the reins in the chariot and Strength, but we haven't yet gotten to things like Justice, where he has to really gauge the nuance he's facing and make big life-altering decisions. Or Temperance, where he has to grapple with, now that I've cleared out what's not serving me to make room for what comes next, well, what does come next? What do we do after the Death card? The Hermit is the crucial step before those events like Death and Temperance and the Tower and the Star, because it's where you take all of those practical, straightforward lessons from the first couple of cards and you analyze them and you understand them. Remember, the Hermit is Virgo. Virgo is all about looking at the details and analyzing and understanding how things fit together. And the Hermit is standing on top of a snow-peaked mountain because the Hermit has overcome a lot of difficulties. He's reflecting on all of those lessons he's learned on his ascent upward. Not everybody makes it this far and reaches that snowy peak, because understandably, it's a lot of effort. And we see that same theme illustrated in Judgment, where once again we've got snowy peaks to overcome. How many of these people are going to reach that snowy peak, and how many are going to stay at the bottom because they don't think it's worth the effort? Now, what about the trees down at the base of the mountains? I read them as some grounding and some earth energy. These people have a solid foundation beneath their feet, and they can heed the call and rise up. I think those trees are very encouraging. They demonstrate that through all the steps these people have taken, they've built a foundation for themselves. That's what they're leaning on as they move toward understanding. It's what they know because it's what they've experienced. So, how did they grow from those experiences? That's what they find out when they ascend and learn from the angel and see if they get to move on to the world. I think one interesting thing to note about this card is that the Rider-Waite-Smith version is pretty unchanged from earlier Marseille-style depictions. Unlike a few other major cards, notably Death and the Lovers, Judgment has remained pretty unchanged for centuries. I think that says a lot about the worldviews of deck illustrators and deck readers. So when you pull up Judgment in a tarot card reading, what does it mean? It typically means that you've done everything that you can, and now you have to wait for an outcome. As you wait for that outcome, you may find yourself reflecting on everything you did to reach this point. You may find yourself doubting or second-guessing some of the choices that you've made, and you also might find yourself feeling very proud of other choices. But I think this is all secondary to the waiting aspect. Regardless of how you feel, the point is you've done all the work you possibly can, and now you're waiting to see, does some third party, some authority figure, think I measure up? Imagine you applied for a job that you would love to get. You submitted your application, you wrote the best cover letter you could possibly write, you went to the interview, and they said, we'll call you by the end of the week. Now you're just waiting for it to be the end of the week. There's nothing else you can do at this point. You can't submit a second cover letter, you just have to wait. In this way, you could interpret this card as a liminal space. Maybe it's the back rooms of tarot cards. But you have to wait, and in doing that, you have to release control. See where that similarity to the Tower comes back? You're not the doer of the action in this card. So let's do a sample pull to see how it works out in a spread with other cards. Because the new year is less than a week away at this point, I'm going to ask cards, what's the big picture theme that I can expect from 2025? So with Judgment pulled out, I'm going to pull 2 other cards to make this a 3-card spread. I pulled the 4 of Wands and the 7 of Pentacles. Interesting. The 4 of Wands can symbolize reaching a plateau in the effort that you're making. The Wands are fire energy, so they're all about passion and drive, but the 4 is being contained and thinking inside the box. And I often think of this as taking a moment to rest and take stock of how far you've come and give yourself a little breather from the go, go, go that is pursuing your passions. And then the 7 of Pentacles has a theme that it's kind of interesting to see the 2 of them adjacent to each other. The 7 of Pentacles, which on your Rider-Waite-Smith deck is the one where the guy is looking at his Pentacles bush and eyeing it up and deciding, hey, when am I going to harvest this thing, is largely about taking advantage of the fruits of your labor and taking the profit from everything that you've been investing in and socking away. And there is sometimes a sense of delayed gratification in this card. That guy's been working really hard on his garden to grow that Pentacles bush, and he could have harvested much sooner, but he chose to delay his gratification to get a bigger reward. So I think combining these 2 together for me, I'm reading my 2 minor cards as this idea that 2025 will be a year marked by sitting back and looking out at the horizon and enjoying the fruits of my labor thus far. It'll be a year marked by delayed gratification in the sense that I've been delaying this gratification and now I get to take it. Cool. Love that for me. But now let's illustrate how they work with the idea of Judgment, because these 2 minor cards are nested under Judgment. I think it's going to be a year of seeing how I stack up and having to answer for, essentially, my resume of working and building. And in fact, let's pull another card. Is this about my tarot business? Is this about my day job career? Is it about something else entirely? Let's see. I've pulled the world. I'm going to read this as all of the above. I think 2025 is going to be a overall year of reckoning for me. Well, not so sure I love that for me as much as I did a few moments ago, but I guess we'll see. We've got Pluto conjunct my sun sign, we've got a couple other transits happening. We'll see. And in a nutshell, that's Judgment energy right there. We'll see. So that's about it for our discussion about Judgment today. I hope you learned something, and I would like to extend a thank you to every single one of you listening. I really appreciate it, whether you've been with me since day one back in April, or if you've started listening a bit more recently. It really means a lot to me that people listen to this podcast. It's a labor of love, it's a lot of fun, and I'm looking forward to seeing where it goes in the future. This is the last episode of Season 1, and after today I'm taking a short break. I'll be back January 16th with Season 2 of the Omg Tarot podcast. So, catch you then! And in the meantime, if you're not following me on Instagram, give me a follow. My handle is its_OMG_tarot. You can also check out my website, omgtarot.com. And if you like what you hear, subscribe and leave me a review. If you subscribe, then you'll know exactly when Season 2 drops in January. And if any bonus episodes drop between now and then. Just saying. But yeah! I hope you're having a fantastic holiday season, and I wish you all an amazing start to the new year. We'll talk soon. Bye-bye.